Coming out flipping.
Hello, Cameron. Good, how are you? Oh. Yeah. No, I sent you an email. And, I just sent you an email and, it was about the sewer contract. heavy snowstorm with limited terrain for my first day on the lift seems like.
Bad choice.
Tomorrow might be okay, but the next day doesn't look good.
Yeah, yeah, and then Saturday, Sunday.
Is this gonna bother you if it's here?
No, not at all. Okay, are we a quorum here with Greg and John and me?
I don't know how that works, to be perfectly honest. I was gonna have to go to legal counsel. I thought you were actually gonna be the only official budget committee member that was here, so I was gonna ask legal counsel to weigh in on that.
Do
Because
we
we
have,
don't really have guidelines for committee meetings in this one,
all
so
right,
I'm just. But you should call the meeting, well, I guess that's the question is, Cameron, can you speak to that for us?
Yeah, so the committee just makes a recommendation. And so there's not really a quorum requirement. So because there's no official action that's taken by the committee, they just do the committee work and they make a recommendation for the town to act on.
If they approve their own minutes, and that's an action.
Yeah, and so you'd have to have a majority of
Okay,
the committee members to approve.
okay, so 2 would count since the committee is officially 3, correct?
Yeah,
Thank
and
you for that.
the
clarification.
committee is you, me, and Elise?
That's my understanding.
Okay, got it, all right.
You know, it's interesting because that's actually what got me out of my cave. It seemed like that we might actually talk about the committees and bringing a little more structure to it. It's been on like a little bit of a pet peeve of mine for a couple of years that we sort of never really, who's running this committee or that committee, and the budget one probably had more substance behind it, but you get into like the compensation committee, or the CapEx committee, who's on those committees?
Well, since the last meeting of this committee was almost exactly 6 months ago, it's a little hard to stay current.
It's hard to tell. I didn't think I was on it anymore, honestly, but I'm happy to be on it today if that helps.
All right. Independent of who's not on it. I will call the Alpha Budget Committee to order on Wednesday, November 29th at 4:03 p.m. And our first order of business, well, let's see, attendees in the room.
Do you mind just doing a quick recap on the conversation, because I didn't have it as part of the recording, and I think it's important that we just had about a quorum and what Cameron said.
Why don't we let Cameron say it?
okay, so before the recording, the discussion was whether or not there was a quorum present of the committee. And so the question was whether or not there were sufficient members of the committee to vote and approve the minutes and or take action. And since the only action that the committee would take for binding the town would be to approve the minutes, and there is a majority potential possible of the committee members, then we can go ahead with the committee meeting.
Thank
That
you,
sound
Cameron.
all right?
Sounds okay to me.
Yes, and it's just to add, I think there was also some comments made about the structure of the committee, and that without having that established in writing anywhere, it makes it really hard both for committee members and the staff to
Yeah.
guide these committees on how to
Yes.
operate and what we can and can't do. And so I think that's something we probably all would like to figure out here soon. And have some
Okay,
structure to.
so maybe we should add that to the agenda, is the structure of this committee.
In the future, yes,
Yeah,
I would advise in that direction.
No, I mean, I think that's, it's sort of one of those time to grow up moments. We've always had
so come on.
like a pretty informal approach to these committees, other than maybe the budgets have a little structure, but I think when you start to consider the overall picture, and one of the things I just said for these guys, I think that rather than think about them so individually, we ought to try to think holistically about, we've got
Yes,
these 4
yes,
committees.
yes,
Let's establish a benchmark for how we're gonna operate, and then fill in the blanks from there.
Yeah.
And so that we bring a higher level of organization and structure to all the
Yeah.
committees.
So, John, just so I understand, suggesting, I mean, I agree with the general tone, but in terms of how to get it done, do you think that's best done at the town council? Or do you actually want to, have a subgroup actually meet and consider that and then propose something?
Well, I think that one thing we could do, since we have kind of a short informal group, we could get the business out of the way today, which I don't think is gonna take very long. And then we could kick around some different ideas. We were sharing some emails in the last couple hours, and I'm happy to share those with you or talk about them.
Okay.
I think that we could. Ultimately, I think we should kind of pencil it in, come up with a penciled in strategy, and then take the penciled in strategy to the TC.
Sounds good
Makes
to
some
me.
sense to me.
Yep. Okay, I just want to say in the room today, but off the camera is Marshall, Mike, and Chris and Jen. And on camera are let's see, Cameron and Craig. Anybody else? Guess not. All right, so first order of business is approval of the minutes from their 6 month ago budget committee meeting, and I read through those minutes. I had one question on them, which had to do with something that you wrote, Jen, was something like tax. Yeah, the minutes, do you have those?
I was just looking for them. Here we go.
Tax member summaries.
Yeah, that was it. Tax member summary. What is a tax member?
I'm sorry, if I'm not looking at it, I'm not.
Where's control of result? Or improvement.
I'm not gonna be able to answer you right on the spot, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
I don't know what my thinking was.
All
Probably
right.
a little bit off.
I thought it was a term that I just was not unfamiliar with.
Probably tax revenue summaries or something.
Yeah, it might just be a typo. We can look into it and
All right,
wait on these minutes.
Oh,
I'm
text
sorry.
minutes,
I don't know, I'd have to listen back to the recording and,
okay.
sorry.
It's not a vital point. And
Well, I'm happy to address it. I just don't have the
Yeah,
capacity
all
to
right.
at the moment.
so, any questions, or otherwise concerning or comments on the minutes?
Done by me.
Okay, so in that case, I move that we adopt the minutes with a clarification on this single item.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Motion passes. All right, approval of the December budget amendment review. So Jen, I believe you will speak to this.
Yeah. I'm going to share my screen. Going to write one. Oh. Oh, sorry, my mouse is not very user friendly today. I'm gonna do it like this, okay. So as we've done in the past, couple years, we've done like a 6 month kind of budget, adjustment amendment, just, there's some things that 6 months ago we didn't know about, that we probably want to address. I am kind of gonna, I provided the committee with some of the highlights of that. So I guess I'll just go through those. I don't think, unless anybody has any specific questions for me about any line items, that I was gonna go through the budget line by line. Because, correct, but you're welcome to ask me. So, the general highlights are that the revenue is increasing by about $130,000. Our expenses, and this is for the general fund, so let me just make sure that's clear. Our expenses increased by $85,000, and we have an additional $44,000 in CapEx support. transfer into that fund. And so that's where you get the 130 increase, because our budgets have to balance out right to zero. You know, really, there's not much in the general fund. I had to plug in some increased revenue, but there's a correlating expense due to some radios, that the Alta Marshal's office is gonna help procure for Snowbird and Alta ski lifts, but there's no net gain or loss to the town of Alta. We're just partnering with them in the purchase of these radios to help with communications. And we have an extension of a contract with John Goldner. And then everything else is really pretty small. Does anybody have any questions about the general fund amendments?
I do not.
Okay.
I did not either.
Yeah, the biggest, and the reason I guess I underestimated the investment revenue. That's another thing I kind of want to point out, I guess. When I did the estimates back 6 months ago or so. So I've increased those, and that's how.
5% today, right?
Yeah, something like that.
So the investment revenue is the PTIF funds?
Well, there's investment revenue on each of those, yes. Yeah, and that is actually, yeah, our key bank doesn't have any revenue, so we keep that balance low. I try and keep it under the 250 amount. It bounces around a little bit, but I'm kind of doing transfers roughly around the time of payroll every couple of weeks. But I pay attention to that every couple of days what that balance is.
Well, that's great, that's great management, because key banks probably pay 1% and the
Not even
PTI,
anything.
PTS
actually.
pay 4 or 5%. So now that we have a few $1 million in the bank, that adds up.
And that was Piper trained me. She was like, keep as minimal amount of money as you can in that key bank and keep it all in the PTIS as long as you can. So that's kind of what I've been doing.
And there's no problem in transferring it? I mean, you can pull it out of
That
PTI.
is something I have the sole ability to do for
Good,
the town, so I manage that.
great.
So, in the capital projects fund, they're really, we have an increase in the contribution that I just kind of talked about in relation to the general fund. So there's more money coming into the CapEx fund, but we didn't, actually change the project list at all for that. Okay, now if we go
Well,
into.
when the increases have got in the contributions to the capital project fund were from,
It's because of the general fund and the calculations that you do there and how you have to zero out and how you have to do your transfer. So that is what affects the contribution. Plus I did recalculate the interest there as well. So there's some increases for both of those reasons. Does that make sense?
yeah, I mean, it's really not a contribution from the outside, it's a contribution within the funds.
No, it's a contribution from the general fund to the capital projects.
That's what
fund.
I meant.
And those are two independent funds.
I understand that, but this is not more money coming from heaven, this is.
Right, and I guess this one doesn't have the category that is the over/under category. Do you know what the account number that is?
The over under.
Right, in the normal
In the
one,
general fund,
yeah.
Yes.
What's that, there's that one line where you sort of have a.
the
run
transfer, it's
yeah.
the transfer, but there is a transfer, actually, you'll see the transfer coming in the capital projects, here, let me.
Oh, yeah, I got it down here now. It's
Yeah,
10,
it's in
it's
the revenue.
1090, 550.
Yeah, so here, I'm gonna scroll down without trying to make anybody too dizzy. Sorry, here we go. So you can see here, we have 315,000 coming into capital projects now, and in the previous budget, we had 271.
Got it,
So that's a $44,000 increase there.
yeah,
Oh, you're looking at the other one.
Yeah, this is in the capital project fund budget,
Gotcha.
not the general fund budget, but this amount matches the transfer that's posted in the general fund budget as well.
Copy that.
And then, so in the water fund, we did have some, changes there. Again, interest recalculated is the main one. And then, oh geez, sorry, mouse is new and very, very touchy. Couple things we did here, are trying to, allocate a little bit more. Previously to this budget, we were not allocating across the board staff time, into the various funds. It was just a small segment of staff, so now we've included some of the town manager's time, because he spends a significant amount of time on both the sewer and the water departments, and so we felt like we should, account for that. So
Sure.
that's the main reason for the change here in the salary and wages number. And then we, on the capital outlay, I had to recalculate some of those numbers as well. For
On
those
the water
projects.
fund, did we put in, to do the update of the studies?
Yes, exactly. Yep. So that's up here in 5143, 320. So we increased that from 15,000 to 31,000
Great.
to do that study. And then we also, in the sewer, fund, we did a correlating study as well,
Now, wait a minute,
that I was gonna speak to.
which study is this on
There's
the
two
waterfront?
studies in 5140, 320.
Uh-huh.
There is the source water protection plan and also just an update to our water system study. So two studies.
The other one is the FEARS study, right? Foursquare, yeah.
Yeah, they did the
The
last
Foursquare
one.
study from 2014 that was laid out the 7 projects. We're
Okay.
gonna update that because
Gotcha, because it needs updating.
it needs updating.
Yeah.
The cost estimates are 10 plus years old.
And then that'll really help because once we have it refreshed, we'll be able to figure out the right timing, but at least plug in the next 1 or 2 or 3 of the projects in that longer spreadsheet. So we'll have a little bit more of a plan that'll actually take us to the end of your administration, which I think would be great.
Yeah.
On those budgets, that's really all, those are the main highlights I wanted to articulate to you.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for me?
I do have an observation. And that is that, we are tending to underestimate how much our capital projects are gonna cost. And what that tells me is we need to put a bigger reserve in our plan.
Bigger contingency.
Yeah. To accommodate. What those,
Contingencies aren't really like spending money.
no,
Not like we're gonna spend more money because we have a contingency.
It's
It's just like, it'd be better planning.
right, we have it budgeted and we don't have to come back and say, oh crap, it cost 50% more, and so we need to come back and do it, so it's much better, in my opinion, to have an underrun on these things. Kick back to the fund than it is to have an overrun.
Do you remember what we used as a contingency for the Peruvian Estates project? Was it 15%, 10%?
I don't know that it was,
But we budgeted $337,997 and we've spent $280,207. So
And it's
that
finished.
project,
Essentially,
I believe, is finished.
Wow, so that one we overestimated,
by 50 grand.
yeah.
And it's,
Sweet.
you know, the Grizzly Waterline completion project was never formally scoped.
Nope, it never
Nobody
was.
took any proposals or anything like that. It was a WAG and
Well,
it was several years old.
Yeah,
So that seems like an easy one to me to write off. I don't disagree or take issue with the notion that we should budget for overruns.
What,
Because it happens, you know, this happens in this economy.
yes, it
happens in
does,
Cotton Canyon.
exactly.
what project were you thinking of? that ran
Well, I
out?
was thinking of the Grizzly project, and I thought that, I didn't realize that the Peruvian project had come in that significantly under.
yeah, I think John Golner kind of in a council meeting a couple months ago, kind of indicated when we received the news that we had gone so far over on the Grizzly, that at that point in the project, he was kind of anticipating that we were gonna come in under budget and Peruvian Estates, but so there was a little bit of an indication of that, I think.
Got it.
But until you get the bill and the time and all the itemization, you don't
Yeah.
actually know that, so.
I had one question about the bill, actually, I guess. Generally speaking, I don't notice us updating these cost figures during the year. Do we, so I guess if the project's finished, then you might update the cost. Right, but we're not really tracking outflow versus budget, like we've expensed 80% of the money or something. But like, it seems like these numbers never change within the year, and I would think that we'd get at least some of them would wrap if we would put a final number on it. Has that been part of the process?
Well, when the council approves a budget, if we're, I mean, that's an approval to, I guess, to spend or whatever, using some of the language we've used. I mean, I am providing year-to-date updates, within the project document on those projects. So those numbers are up to date as of whatever the date is on that report.
That's this report?
So, yes,
Yes,
correct.
yes.
So those numbers on those, the front page is just the cover page, but the numbers on the second page were updated, I think, the day I put the packet out or the day before.
Yeah.
Page. right?
The second.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those numbers are up to date.
Cool. And so, yeah,
So what I'm saying is just, there's nothing in there for me that makes me think that we needed to like, I mean, I guess we could
get more
amend it to
approval.
go down, but I would only ask you probably for permission if it's going above.
I think that's the right way to do it. I'd agree with that. Don't you think if it's coming in under,
Yeah.
this is gonna be good news here at some
Right.
point?
Might I make a few comments? I think there are sort of three ways to deal with what you're talking about, Roger. One is actually at the individual fund level, so not at the individual project level, but at the fund level itself. And one of the things that John Byrne suggested some time ago is that we actually establish targets for each of the fund balances. And I think that's a good idea. I think we could probably do that with the general fund, right away. I would suggest maybe for the other funds, we wait a bit until we've got the updated water study and the updated sewer study. So that would be at the fund level. Second thing we can do is actually improve the quality of our project planning. And some projects, don't have much variance, and we have some idea on those. Other projects are really big. And for those kinds of projects, we might either, rate them as high risk and automatically put in some kind of buffer on those projects. Or alternatively, one of the things that we can do is go to iterative refinement of like a big budget, like we have a civic project budget or something that's in the millions. You actually separate the budget estimate from the authority to spend, and you only have the authority to spend on maybe the first part. And then you update, as John is talking about, you would update then the budget, periodically on those big projects. So, it's sort of, again, what I'm saying is we can do things at the individual project level, and we can do things at the fund level. And I think both are valid ideas. But I think particularly on the larger projects, we might want to have, a multi-step iterative process of revising the budget and separating the authority to spend into chunks over the execution timeframe of the project.
Well, one way to do that, in my experience, is to have the projects in phases. And at the end of each phase, you relook at where you are.
Especially in multi-year projects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's the time when you recalculate the return and say, how are we doing compared to what we thought we were going to do?
And I think it only really matters on the multi-year ones.
Yeah.
Things that we're gonna get done within a given fiscal year,
Yeah,
I don't think it's gonna be that interesting.
right. But phasing in the larger ones would be worthwhile.
Yeah, then hopefully that's where these studies are gonna take us is, the ability to actually really drill down, and presumably write some RFPs and get some bids,
Yep.
to pick the next one or two projects and really be able to go deeper into the finances of it too.
And the phasing does not have to coincide exactly with the fiscal year. The phasing may coincide with, would be tailored to what the natural phases are in a project.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, we have more questions, comments concerning the December budget amendment review? I guess I have a question of you. You had to bet on next June, this being, we over or under budgeted. Which would you bet on?
I think we're gonna be pretty darn close.
So,
Outside of the projects, outside of some of the bigger projects, but like in the general fund, I think we're gonna be really close.
okay,
And I think we're gonna, I mean, you guys are gonna know in real time as, you know, staff is working on stuff,
oh, I'm not worried about this telling us.
you know,
I'm
yeah.
I'm just trying to get a sense of your confidence in how,
Well, I get this information from other people, so, and I trust my coworkers to give me the best information they have
Well,
at those.
there's not that many opportunities for variance. I mean, the projects are the opportunities for expense variance. I mean, we're gonna have a little variance in salaries and wages because of our, you know, assistant manager hiring.
yeah, but that's predictable now,
Right, and that was
and
predicted,
that's incorporated here.
yes.
So those are minor.
You know, in terms of the salaries,
It's more the snow and the
Yes, the
shoveling and
revenue,
those
yeah.
sort of things that are
Sure.
less predictable. I mean, I think in, you know, Mike Morty's department and, you know, and how much he needs to use part-timers, you know,
Uh-huh.
how. You know, that's a little bit, I mean, I think we've budgeted pretty well on all that stuff and we've learned from, I mean, especially last winter. You know,
Where was this project? Was this its own item? I
it's
didn't,
just,
No, I
Just
just
document.
created that. I was gonna speak just to the projects plan document that you already have, and
it's a nice
Sorry,
I
summary,
should stop looking for this.
correct.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
just got
The one
posted,
page.
I'll send it to you.
it's in the packet.
Thank you.
But Chris sent it and I was like, oh, this should actually potentially be the cover page of the projects as opposed to like the other pages.
This, I like this.
It's nice and simple and easy
Nice
to
and
read,
simple.
yeah.
Jen showed me how to set the print area on a spreadsheet, so I can make a one-page PDF many years ago.
Now,
Sometimes
what's,
if I Google it, I can figure it out. So
But maybe before we speak to this, do we wanna just wrap up? I think that's what you were trying to do, Roger.
Yeah, I was.
On the budget amendment.
Asking you to make a bet was my wrap up.
You know,
and I think the other side of the question is revenue. How well did we project revenues? And I think we've been in the process over the last couple of years of our revenue projections have adjusted to the new norm of post-COVID recreation demand and Alpha being on a season pass product and, you know,
Well,
decent economy and.
they're typically under,
And we moved more of our revenue to property tax, which is more predictable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that sense,
well, and now there's, I don't know if it's a Wall Street rumor or a fact, but supposedly there's a new virus in Wuhan that's infecting people.
oh, great.
And maybe, you know, I saw it on CNBC today, so there's gotta be some element of truth to it.
Yeah,
The next one, it would sure suck to go back to the.
it certainly would suck. It certainly
Well,
would suck. On the other hand, the world is better prepared for such a thing.
Yeah, but I think we're better prepared
Yeah,
because we maxed out our reserve fund, and I mean, that's why we have the
yeah,
one times earnings,
yeah.
one times revenue reserve fund.
Okay, how about, I think this, I would consider this still part of the discussion of the budget, would you not?
We have projects update on the agenda.
Yeah.
yeah, so, but
Oh,
As I presented to this committee, that's how the proposed December budget will go to the council, because I don't hear any suggested changes from you.
I think it was great work. And
no changes for me.
I'd be prepared to speak in favor of it at the council meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, if you look at the budget, it's uncannily accurate. I mean, essentially, almost all the variances are coming from the interest rate changes, basically. And everything else is just so small, it doesn't matter. So that means we either did a really great job of budgeting, or we haven't learned that, there's nothing we've learned in the last 6 months that causes us to vary us. I agree pretty much with Jen's analysis. I think we're going to come in smack on budget, save what happens on the snow stuff. So I think, and I also think the presentation is much clearer than it used to be. So I'm very happy where we are. I did want to call out just 3 things that really aren't related to the budget amendment, because I think that's all great. One is we did a big thing on the salary stuff last year. We've had a lot of inflation this year. I don't know how you feel about whether we should try to get some more external input on the salaries again, or you think we've got that enough under control and can do it, just a general update in June based upon, sort of cost of living type increases. So that was one question. This is really about budgeting over the next 6 months. Second one, Jen, and you and I have talked about this before, and I'm certainly not going to press you for an answer now, but it's very helpful to have the, where we are in the current year. Even better would be if we move to monthly budgets, because then we'd have a more, a better sense of when the timing of stuff was gonna hit. I know we've talked about that before. I think it would be useful for you to figure out if that's something that is a lot of extra work or not much more work, because I think that would improve the quality of our reporting. And then last but not least, I'll reiterate what I said. I think it would be useful at the town council level to think about target balances for each fund. I don't think we should do the couple of funds that we're doing the long-term studies on yet, but maybe we should have a discussion about a target balance for the general fund, at the town council level. And then when we're reporting, we can see how we're doing against that target budget. That target balance, I'm sorry.
Comment?
Yeah.
I know, please. I think all that makes sense. With the general fund, it's really 1 times revenue is the target.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the most we can reserve. And so that's changing a little bit as our revenue changes. So when you think about how that balance fluctuates, it really gets back to that over/under line and how much is going to the capital fund.
I agree, John. I was just saying that, if we had a lower threshold, like 80% or something like that, to just say, oh, we're going to be below this threshold, I think that might be helpful for the town council.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder, why we would ever want to have less than 1. I know it's hard to get it right because you don't know the actual revenue figure until the end either, and then you're trying to line it up. But she gets it pretty close. I think if for whatever reason, it would be interesting to the council if for whatever reason we're ever drifting very far away from 1 times revenue, that would probably be an interesting thing for us to know. Because I'm always assuming that we're right there, sort of redlining at how much we can reserve.
Greg, in your earlier thought about should we rerun or have an update to the salary study, if we did, I would want to make it close to the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
And I would note that, inflation rates seem to be trending down, although who knows? and I don't, I like to have kind of a sense of how much that's affecting salaries. The salary study that we had by a guy, was named Steve?
Mike Swallow.
Mike Swallow was really quite thorough and quite illuminating. I'm not sure that we need to go to that depth. I can't remember how much it costs us to do
If I
that.
can speak a little bit to
Okay,
it.
yeah.
So my understanding of the wage adjustments that were made was that the philosophy in part was to try and bring staff up to at least the minimum line. There's a few
Right.
staff that are over that, with the understanding that there was probably gonna be more than one adjustment.
Yeah,
I.e., you know, and I think that's what Craig's asking, when do we wanna consider making that adjustment? And kind of bring everybody, because not everybody is on the bell curve with their tenure at the town, there, you know, everybody's got a little bit of a different situation on the scale, and so I was under the impression that this was gonna be reviewed again.
Mhm.
And now that we've kind of like done the heavy lifting of getting all of our job descriptions and have a good sense in Mike Swallow's system, an update is really not as much work as the original study.
so are you suggesting we do that soon?
Just for next year's budget.
Yeah, for next year's budget, but not
consider.
not in January.
To take effect July 1.
Correct.
Sure, okay.
And I mean, I think Jen basically spoke to this, but. You know, I think we can almost consider the Mike Swallow product a living document, and he has the capability now that the spreadsheet is developed and customized to us to just, you know, plug current data into it and see where it leaves us. You know,
Because is he, I presume with that, it's not a bell curve, it's this, I don't know how to describe that.
Exponential.
Yeah, well, it's not quite that either.
and so not.
It's, I presume he's effectively continuously updating that with outside data.
That's his business, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And that,
So, but to have some results for you to make some decisions on, for, you know, we essentially should be starting that process in January. You know, it'll take some time to get through that updating process.
Okay.
Whatnot.
that's why I'm raising it. So if you want to do it, and I, from memory, I believe it cost us $5,000 last year. I don't know if it will cost us less the second year or the same. But
Well, we have various options. I mean, Mike has it off the shelf, like you pay $100 a month and you can do the work yourself to plug into his portal, his framework. But if we wanted to have like a full blown like redoing of our worksheet, that would be more expensive. But I think, I can't imagine we would need to spend more, even if we wanted him to really be hands-on with an update with us. I would think it would be less than $1,000.
Okay,
We have the subscription, but I think we might want a little more hands-on review with them. So,
definitely worth it.
At the risk of being unpopular, one of the things that I always have to remind myself about the Mike Swallow study is that it doesn't take into account our view of how we think the employee's doing. It doesn't take into account our view of their work ethic. It doesn't take into account our view of their sense of responsibility. Are they a good mentor? Are they lead?
It's not individualized.
Well, but I think for all but mine, I think that's internal. Right?
yeah,
There's a budget, you guys do the budgeting, but then that's a supervisors recommend. I don't know,
Raises.
it's a kind of a brave new world with town manager ordinance maybe on that, but
with
you know,
just,
you guys like.
yeah, I mean, the mayor was the one that set the salaries, essentially, is the way, we took the information from the Mike Swallow study.
Yeah.
It was given to the supervisors. The supervisors then worked with me and then communicated with the mayor, and the mayor ultimately was the one that kind of like decided that on an individual level. I think that's gonna be different with the town manager now, but and then the town council approved the budget. That was kind of like the sequencing of how that happened.
Mhm. And I think that all makes good sense. I think that it's, I think it is gonna make sense for Chris to be involved, but I also think the mayor's still gonna wanna be involved.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe, we're getting close to a segue onto committee discussion, but, you know, I'm gonna say on the committee side, I think that we should try to have a little bit more of a formal compensation committee. And I think that should be, you know, maybe the three of you. You know what I mean, led by you, but with Jen and Roger. And Mike, if he wants to be on it. So I guess I just wanted to remind everybody that it's not just straight math coming out of the Mike Swallow thing, that we want some latitude, and so when we talk to our employees about it. We don't wanna, I think you would wanna shy away from saying, hey, we got you to the bottom of the band, but now this time we're gonna get you to the second quartile, and, you know, and have it sound like it's like a strictly calculated
Yes.
number. It's really, you
Crank
know,
turning.
there's plenty of room for you guys to express your thoughts.
And I, you know, that was definitely considered in part, that's why going to the supervisors and having them, you know, there's, in Mike's Fall, there's like a middle, max and all that, you know, all those numbers were kind of considered, and there were, you know, some reviews done of employees at the same time, and so, you know, that we're trying to kind of.
And we
get more into the
do we have an
habit.
employee review each year?
Supervisors do that,
Supervisors meet with the employee
It's up
and
to
have
the
an individual
supervisor.
review with them each year?
yes.
That's awesome, and it's in writing, they put something in the employee's file?
Supervisors usually hold on to those files, those records.
Cool. That's good, that's how it should be.
And you and I have a review every 4 years.
Of our salary.
No, of our continued employment.
Right, populist review, right, populist review.
Tell you what, let's move on. If
Move on.
we finished this, I'm interested in this, dated today projects update.
Yeah, that's right. It could be more current. So
No time on it, just
this is just it's basically the project's document, you know, with blank lines omitted and projects without an allocation or a proposed budget until future years or last year. All that was excluded. So, you know, these are projects that were budgeted for, you know, for implementation, completion and expense in fiscal year 24. The highlights are that our big water system projects are done. So it's such a nice thing to be able to report. We talked about the overage on the Grizzly project. We talked about the under budget. We're, you know, to date, we're under budget on the Peruvian water line replacement. I don't think we're getting any more invoices. It's been a month since any work was done on the project. You know, and the other big ones are the generator, which was not originally contemplated as a fiscal year 24 project until we amended the project's plan and the budget in, well, until we adopted the final budget after Truth and Taxation in August for that project. We have some outstanding invoices on that project. And we have a couple of minor punch list items. Basically, we have a little bit of electrical troubleshooting to do and some what you'd call plumbing work on the exhaust. But if the power goes out, that generator will turn on and it'll provide power to the buildings. And so that's a really nice thing.
it's been thoroughly tested.
Thoroughly tested. I mean, we've killed the utility power a couple times. You know, Mike might be able to add some more color on that.
Maybe one more, you know, technical load test coming in the next week or so.
Yeah, the auto start capability of the thing was kind of bespoke, like the electrician sort of had to retrofit it. Not retrofit it, but let's say program it. So anyways, it's nice and quiet, it looks good, the new deck is fantastic, so that's just a great place to be with that project, I think, so that's a good one. I mean, about the truck. You know, the shuttle, we're gonna start invoicing folks in the next few days or next week. Probably I'm working on a contract with Alpha Shuttle. The security camera project's gonna be done in the next month to 6 weeks, I would say. right? We have a vendor selected, we haven't signed a contract. The evidence cage is installed, we just don't have a final invoice for installation yet, so that project's
I
done.
just haven't paid it, we actually have the invoice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Meters, Casey told me today, they've installed 5 of the Grizzly meters, and they're just gonna keep working on the,
They've installed
user
5 of the Grizzly meters.
yeah, they'll just keep plugging away at those as they do meter reads, on the meters that are inside.
Now, I notice you kicked some of that now reaching into 2025, fiscal 25. So we don't think we'll get it completed in next year's,
Oh,
or in this year's current fiscal.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think that's the plan has always been for that it started last fiscal year with Powder Ridge. This fiscal year was gonna be.
It's 3 years.
Oh, was it 3 years? I
Yeah,
thought it was
it
2
was,
years.
no, it was
Yeah.
3 years.
Sure, great.
Yeah, so I think we would finish with like central town of Alta, like business, commercial core area. Meters in the fall of 25 if we were on track, but for fall of 24. So that'd be fiscal 25 if we were on track. I'm not sure we'll get that, but
I know she had $50,000 in 25 now though, so.
yeah.
Yeah, we kind of just adjusted. The total hasn't changed over the 3 years, but we've adjusted which year the spend is a little bit with.
Awesome. That's a great project to get done.
oh,
It's a cool project. Yeah, it's already yielded some benefits, I would say, like.
Save a lot of labor.
Yeah. And then, I don't have, we can acknowledge, I suppose, the additional projects, that we proposed adding funding in. I mean, we just sort of, got a ping from Casey about the drinking water source protection plan, state required. Document on a 6-year cycle we have to update. We reached out to the engineer who did the last one and got another ask for his grant if they wanted to propose. And we signed a contract with Aqua Engineering, and they're gonna get that done by December 31st and submitted to the state. It sounds like it's one of those very pro forma.
That's key, Aqua's Keith.
It's not, just keep it a state.
Oh, I thought that's what he was calling his thing was,
Yeah.
I thought that's what he was calling
I
it.
think so.
Yeah. Well, is it his company? Well, it's not.
Yeah.
And then we have the 2 master planning type projects that I'm looking forward to writing up RFPs for those.
Well, you're looking at the water and sewer.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, water
Yeah,
system.
25K
study,
each.
update and sewer study. Yeah, so.
And do you think that timing is gonna allow you to execute a project in the following fiscal in 25? If you're getting the report by the end of 24?
I don't know. I kind of doubt it. I think just with what I understand about, I think it seems like we're off the back in terms of a major project, in terms of doing, engineering. In order to issue an RFP or something and then order materials for a big project. But I've never really implemented one of those from start to finish, so I don't know what it takes to order supplies for, say, a project to replace the sewer line under the Wildcat. Or a project to do the loop in town. So perhaps there's a smaller project that we can tee up. We might even know enough about one of those projects without updating the studies or doing a sewer study to tee something up for the summer, but we just haven't gotten that far. So I did have a conversation with Casey about all this stuff this morning, and so.
Yeah,
Progress to make.
I think that's all very reasonable and certainly, as the studies come back. I think the path forward will be more clear. It'd be nice to execute. The list was like 8 projects originally. We did 2 of them now. And to some extent, the Peruvian one actually combined what I think were 2 separate projects on the original study. So I think there's like 5 to go.
Mhm.
And so it'd be nice to knock off one more during Roger and my's term,
Yeah,
if possible.
I think that is like the right goal, and it's the right goal. It's simple.
Just two questions for you, Chris. One, did I hear that the generator is basically done, but you just got a few more tests that you have to run, and that we spent the money and we just have some outstanding invoices, but you don't expect a lot more money to be spent?
Well, By outstanding invoices, I mean, we haven't received them.
Yep.
So it's not that we've received them, we haven't paid them, and, you know, thus they don't appear here. It's that we haven't received them. We got basic cost estimates from, you know, who I would, in hindsight, consider subcontractors, you know, the electrician, plumber. And we haven't received an invoice from the general contractor who did the work on the structure and the removal and installation with a crane of the generator units. So there's a fair amount, that's basically the generator and like some pertinent expenses. And so we have a fair amount of bills to pay, but the sum of the cost estimates from the plumber, the electrician, and the contractor are less than 28, or, you know, 27.
But my real question wasn't on the cost. It was on the, is the work mostly done?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. And-
Mostly
and-
done, and we will expend almost all of that budgeted amount.
Yeah,
I think the mobile generator got like dragged down the hill. The road out the central on skids between two pieces of, well, I don't know.
Really?
It was on skids. Between two pieces of equipment, I think, you know, within hours of the beginning of the weekend storm, and it was like, what a Thanksgiving miracle.
And it's now in the building.
It took some hassling of electricians, you know, folks were heading out on vacation, and we got folks back up the canyon to work on stuff, and I, you know, I have to give credit to the Marshals Department, especially James Chickberry. I mean, if you guys see James around, give him a pat on the back for being, in so many cases, the person who picks up the ball and runs with it on tasks, on major projects. He figures stuff out, he gets it done, he steps in before I even know somebody needs to. And so thanks to Mike, and thanks to James, and thanks to everybody for getting that scrum.
He may also be due kudos on this inventory closet.
Oh, yeah, and so many other things. He really is we get a lot out of James.
So Mike, how did the inventory closet get budgeted at 20K and come in at 7,600?
We haven't paid all of the invoices yet.
And we have some other expenses that are gonna go along with that project, safes and shelving.
Yeah, it's not done.
Okay, it's not that big a difference, all right. Good. Well, this is a pretty darn nice report. So you're suggesting an additional budget of 56K? Or,
Well, yeah, that's in all of the budgets that are, this is just on the project level of view of it, where this stuff has all been incorporated into the budget. That you
Gotcha.
guys, those 4 budgets that you guys have already kind of signed off on.
I must say that I think that our project management performance is really great.
Here. We had actually had a secret plan to congratulate you on your success last meeting, and somehow it got dropped off our plate. Decided to get out of here or something. I don't know.
Projects, I mean.
No, but you did great. You know, you got the 2 big water projects
Yeah.
and the generator project, which came out of nowhere.
It was
So I
big
mean,
one.
that's a lot to be proud of.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I was just gonna credit my colleagues and predecessors on the water projects, because they really were basically in motion, by the spring. And so thanks, John, thanks, Jen, thanks, Keith and Casey, thanks you guys. Thanks for the homeowners for putting up with the mess.
I would chime in and say that all of our projects have been, rocketed with success thanks to Chris.
That's what I meant. Like I said.
Well, we'll have to remember to cheer at the meeting.
Yes, we will. Okay, next item on the agenda is audit committee review. Craig put some stuff out for this, take a look at.
Yeah,
Greg,
can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, great. So, yeah, I distributed the slides ahead of time, so, and I'll assume everybody's read them. I'm not going to go through them slide by slide. I think from the research I've done, I think at least one change is needed, And that is that if we, actually, let me take a step back. The reason this is coming up now is because our contract with the existing auditor is up. And by general practice, you usually have a 3 or 4 year and rotate your auditor every 3 or 4 years. And the reason for that is essentially you just want a fresh set of eyes looking at it. So you do not need an audit committee. It can be done at the town council level. And if you want to do it at the town council level, I think the only change that we need is just to have the mayor sign the contract, not have the mayor and the staff sign the contract. Most of the slides, if you look through them, there's really only, there's one big reason to have an audit committee. And well, there is a reason that it needs to be done at the town council level and not at the staff level. And that reason is you want to bring the auditors in under the auspices of somebody other than management to avoid the inherent conflict of interest that otherwise would occur. That can be done at the audit committee level, or it can be done at the town council level. I think that there are pros and cons to having an audit committee. The con is you're establishing yet another committee, and committees tend to live forever once you start them. And, towns sort of die by accretion, meaning they just keep adding stuff and they never subtract stuff. The other problem with an audit committee is it's the one committee that hardly anybody ever wants to serve on because it is a committee that has downside and not a lot of upside. The pro is, I think you guys have heard me before that, of course, we have to have an outside audit, but in general, the outside audits, the only real purpose of an outside audit is to make sure that you're complying with all the GAAP procedures and fraud detection. And honestly, I don't think they necessarily do a great job on either of that. I was pretty disappointed that, when the debt issue came up, it didn't come up from either of the two auditors that we would have had, in the time frame. And I'm not really telling you that's abnormal. What I am saying is that my experience, things like that often get missed by auditors, leading me to think that this is not a, necessarily a high value thing. So in the big pro there is by having a separate committee focus on effectively the risk management, you get a little bit more focus on that in an area that often doesn't interest some of the town council members. And I think actually most importantly, it fairly dramatically lowers our risk score, which probably has good ripple effects on our risk insurance and things like that. So I do have a lot of comments.
That's the fraud risk assessment. That's the fraud risk assessment score.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it isn't just it isn't just having the audit committee. It's actually the other thing that they give a pretty big boost on is the whistleblower, line. And for that, you absolutely need something that is separate and distinct from management to actually, hear that and review it. So I think it's probably a good idea to have it, but I don't think, if you don't have one, I don't know that it will make a dramatic difference in the way that we operate. It's, as I said, the main benefit is really going to be on the risk scoring. But I do have a number of comments on sort of the detailed write-up on it. But I think really I wanted to pause there and see, what the general feeling was. If we're going to do it, we should do it now, because this is the time that we're changing auditors. So if you don't do it now, I would recommend that you go to a 3-year renewal period on auditors. Again, because I think the most value comes in the first year. So if you rotate it a little bit more frequently, it tends to improve the quality of it. So it's sort of make the decision now or revisit it in 3 years' time.
So I have some questions about it. let's talk about this, broad risk, score and its effect on our insurance rate. What is the effect, monetarily?
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know that it does.
In fact, you're not even sure that it does make a difference in our insurance rate.
I don't.
Okay,
I will have to research that.
but Craig, you think it does?
Awesome.
I think it does, and I think I was told that. I don't remember who I was told that by, but I thought it was Jen, but clearly it wasn't Jen.
Yeah, I'll have to.
It might have been, it might have actually been a hangover from Piper. I'm not sure.
So the other question I have is, if we have a whistleblower event now, let's say some citizen decides that Mayor Burke is spending too much on meals at conferences, and that how is that?
I don't think that's
how
the
is that?
nature of a whistleblower would be that Roger Burke is, as mayor and a signer of the account, signing fraudulent checks to himself.
Oh,
It's not
Oh.
about the budget.
Yeah.
And the
Well, we have a
main-
contractor that's double
It's
billing
that-
us and splitting the
And
money.
staff knows about it,
Yeah,
and it's.
splitting the money with
moving-
somebody on the staff.
Yes, it's that
That
type
kind
of
of a-
stuff that this whistleblower line would be designed for. Does that,
yeah, okay, that's a little more serious than I
Yes.
had.
Well, and go ahead.
Well, how is it processed? Let's say some whistleblower does come in and say that, I'm signing checks that go to this fictitious company that's, to kick it back to me.
right now, it either would go through the mayor or the town manager, one of those. And it depends on if it's an outside member of the public or if it's an internal staff person. In our employee handbook, we actually have a mechanism for staff to go through the town manager essentially to report on something like that. So it kind of depends. And the creation of this committee, then they would,
Yeah,
I don't want us to necessarily get ahead. They would actually design how this would happen. So
Yeah.
we haven't gotten to that detail yet.
Well, I got it that this committee is one of its functions is to figure out how to handle these. I'm just questioning, how would we handle it now?
Well,
We don't have.
Now-
We don't have an
We
SOP
don't-
for that, really.
we don't have a whistleblower. The whole whistleblower thing is designed to give employees a way to report what they think is misconduct by management without going through management. That's
Yeah,
the
Yeah.
concept. That's why I have a number of comments on the actual detailed construction, because some of the stuff there is problematic around that. I did note that the state of Utah basically said whistleblower stuff has a significant and material impact upon incidences of fraud, which is inconsistent with, I've been on 2 audit committees of public companies. In neither one did I ever, for a number of years, and neither one was it ever utilized. But I do know that if it is utilized, it has to be done very discreetly. And the employees have to believe that management isn't going to see it,
right.
because otherwise it doesn't work at all.
Cameron has his hand up.
Yes,
Cameron might have something to say on
he
this.
does.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. So right now, if there is not a policy or if there's no other option, it falls according to state law. And so state law says that if there is a whistleblower concern, that the employee goes to the supervisor of the person that they are suspecting of misconduct, or the chief executive, or the legislative branch of the entity, or the Utah Attorney General's office, or the Utah Auditor. And so even without a process, there is a statutory sort of fallback process that exists for any governmental entity.
And ultimately, it's really a legislative body issue, right?
Yes, I mean,
As I read through all these today, it's sort of most of them kind of defer ultimately to the legislative body.
yeah, and so if So if, for example, if the concern is about a member of the legislative body, the employer, the person could make the report to another member of the legislative body or the chief executive. And if they think that the entire governmental entity is in on the deal, they can go to the attorney general's office or to the state auditor. So there's multiple pathways under state law where people can make those reports. And then whoever received those reports also has the statutory responsibility to follow up, to, investigate, to appoint people to investigate, not to retaliate against the employee. So there is that process as a default already.
Could I make a couple comments?
Yeah.
So I think a fraud risk, you never think it's gonna be you.
Right.
That's all it is. And so for us to up our game in fraud risk protection, I think would be very responsible of us. It's one of those things that kind of never is really intended to. So I'm definitely all for upping our fraud risk protection game. The indigestion I had this year about the it wasn't about the pledge. Right, because we had to have the pledge because we would have sort of failed the fraud risk review or would have fallen to an unacceptable level without it. And we got it all kind of wound up about what the pledge was going to say. The truth is, and I think this echoes what Craig said a few minutes ago, if you establish an audit committee, that worrying about those last 5 points goes away because we're going to be up in the very good kind of area on the fraud risk report. And then if we do the whistleblower hotline too, as part of this, we're going to be in really good shape with respect to fraud protection. We'll be able to look at our constituents and say, we've done our job to try to protect the town from fraud risk. Interesting thing that I came across today is we actually have a fraud risk ordinance in place.
We do?
And it's similar to yours.
Where'd you find it?
I found it, I was searching the code for some other stuff, and it's resolution 2020 R21. Was done during the Harris Sondak era.
That didn't pass.
Oh, it didn't, it's funny because it's,
That's the.
what's that?
Is this the audit committee?
Yeah, this is the thing. It looks a lot like what we,
Yes. No, that's what I've kind of originally used as a model. No, Harris brought this up and
it didn't pass.
It didn't pass.
Weird that it's in our ordinance. I mean, like I searched for it.
So,
Code?
because
Yeah.
it's in the ordinance, it's in the,
Well, maybe it just brought it to me because it was on a prior agenda or something.
and so this is a resolution.
Well, this was the resolution and here's the charter. So they had two documents
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
approach.
Yeah.
The documents are actually pretty similar to what you sent
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
And I would say that the charter very closely follows the state, as did yours.
No, that's exactly, I went back to that stuff because I knew Polly and Piper had worked on it when they had presented it to the council and the council decided not to adopt it.
That's interesting. I'll have to go back and see where I sorted it. Google brought me to it because I like searched.
Well, it's on our website because it was presented to the council.
Oh, that's
And
it.
so the documents were posted.
And so that's why they
But
showed it
if
to
you
me.
look, but if you look at like the actual adopted resolutions, that one never.
I'll
passed.
have to go back
Do you
and look at.
recall why it was not adopted?
My understanding is that there were a couple things. One being that maybe the council just thought it was like overkill. And that the creation of a committee, as kind of Craig was alluding to, that
Right,
the existing council could kind of do that work.
Well, plus the pandemic was raging. Right, because it was in 2020.
and
I remember being at the council meeting when they were discussing this. It was in person.
I'm just thinking that with all the other stuff going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It's,
both the old one and the new one are very close to the state code stuff,
no
so
question.
there's hardly any variance. And again, I don't want to, your comment about being able to face off to the constituents and sort of say, look, this is best practice. We're following best practice. I agree 100% with that. My caution around that was, even with best practice, my general experience on this is it's more pro forma than it is substantive. but it does, the whistleblower one, I think actually is important. Because I have seen that, I was on a board of a company where that went completely sideways, and it eventually resulted in the resignation of the CEO. So I think having a good whistleblower process in place, the guy should not have resigned. It was just this big political mess, and we didn't have a good enough whistleblower thing in place to actually head that stuff off. So that's the only substantive thing that I've had come out of this. But from a best practice standpoint, it's pretty clear this is what people do. So
I mean, it doesn't matter until it does. And I know we
Yeah.
had some missing funds last year. I was a little surprised. And maybe it just resolved them all to zero, and that's why, but I noticed that it wasn't even mentioned in the audit this year. And I was kind of like looking through the audit, thinking, yeah, well, what's the debrief on what happened?
I gave him the whole kit of like, I had a spreadsheet that tracked it and it all came back, and it wasn't internal, that was the thing. It wasn't an internal thing, it was external, not to say, I mean, that still is a risk, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But no, they asked about that and I gave them all the paperwork on it.
So they just left it out of the audit.
What if we did this? What if we created an audit committee and we put a sunset clause in it that would review it in some period of time, which may be 18 months or 2 years, to decide whether we want to continue with it?
I think there's a couple ways we could do that. You know, we could sync up the terms of the people on the committee to coincide with your administration, so that the next administration
Decide whether
will have to appoint a committee if they want to continue the activity.
There we go.
I had a couple little other comments. One, I also found this, which I thought was interesting, 1-5-3, which basically is marked there, which basically says that we should be appointing these committees with town council approval. And so I just throw that out as sort of a background item. And then, you know, we have this sort of macro idea of, it'd be great to bring, I think the committees that matter are the budget committee, the CapEx committee, the compensation committee, and maybe now the audit committee. So there's 4. I threw it out just so you guys, you know, in conversation. One way we could do that, I think that all the committees should have 2 elected officials. And I think it would be preferable if no one person chaired more than one of the committees. We want to get away from the idea that the same person's going to chair 2 or 3 different committees, because I think that's veering toward the triangle. So one of the ways that I thought it could work out is that we could have Jen lead the budget committee, because she is our budget officer. I said you, Chris, should chair the CapEx committee, since that seems to be in your world. And you're the guy driving it. And then Craig or Roger should do the compensation committee. And I think that makes sense, because you guys are the ones who got through it this past year. And then somebody else should do the audit committee. If there's nobody else, I would do it if you guys wanted me to. I'm not asking for the job. But I would do it if you wanted to. I've also served on a audit committee for a public company as well, Apartment REIT. So I sort of thought those people at the top of the committee, right, as the chair of the committees, and then started to think about filling in the blanks beneath that. Like Craig or Roger should do the compensation committee chair. The other one should be on the committee, and I think also Chris should be on the committee for compensation, and maybe it's the 3 of you. I think Jen doing the budget is what makes sense, and it's consistent with what I see in those state auditor trainings of, you've got a budget officer, the budget officer runs the show. To me, that is, you are the chair of the budget committee. But I think obviously Craig has a big interest in the budget committee, so great. Maybe we could get Elise to be, we still need 2 elected officials though,
2 elected per.
each one. So all I did was sort of pencil in the guy at the chair for the top of each of the 4. And then I think the rest of the people should sort of mostly follow, but we're gonna need a few volunteers. And then I really like the charter. I think that's a big step forward.
The charter.
You know, having the 2-page charter that sort of defines your mission and says what you're gonna do, and I think we should think about what committees it would make sense for us to have a charter for. I don't think all of them. I'm not sure that the compensation committee needs to have a charter. But maybe, you know, we think about writing a charter for the budget committee and the CapEx committee. And then we've already written one for the audit committee. So that's not an inordinate amount of work, and I think the pieces sort of generally fit in. Focusing back on the audit committee, I think what makes sense there, and I think we could have some discussion on this. I don't see Steve, I see Steve's role as being an outside consultant. And I don't see Steve as part of management. The way some of the material sort of depicted it. And so I think that when you talk about the audit committee, you could have Steve, me, and one other person, one other elected official, and just keep it to that. And the chances are the audit committee does very, very little between now and the end of Roger's term. That's kind of probably the only reason I'm volunteering is because I just don't see it being a big burden time-wise. And I think Steve would be appropriate on that committee. He would also be the financial expert that's envisioned by the statute. Anybody like to comment on that?
I know that I can appreciate your perspective on Steve, but I guess, you know, Steve doesn't directly touch the books, but he guides me on how to do entries. And so I think that for that reason, how we think of people that are in management, we might want to separate him from this, the same as me.
You'd like to have somebody further away.
Yes.
You know, one thing we could do.
Ken, does he have
Oh,
right access? Does he have right access to the GL?
He does not, but he's guiding me on how to
Yeah.
do certain
You're saying
entries that
he's got a
are,
lot of influence over it. Yeah,
yes,
okay.
yeah.
I'm not sure that disqualifies him. It actually means he's up to speed, and so if something comes down the road, it's not gonna be, we're not gonna have to start by getting this outside person up to speed on how we're doing things. I float out that maybe we should ask Steve what he thinks. He may have his own ethical barrier to doing it, or he may say, hey, yeah, I do that for a couple of my other clients, I'd be happy to do it for you. And so I'd be open to hearing what he had to say about it, just because it's kind of the path of least resistance. And then, you know, I didn't want to step on your toes and think about how the other pieces would fit together. I mean, you know, we all love Elise, and you know, if you could get Elise to work on the budget committee, I think that would be a win.
I would do too.
On the budget committee or the audit committee?
I don't think she's needed on the audit committee, honestly. Oh, because you need a second
Sorry, I'm just
person.
wondering, I'm just making sure we're talking about we're focused on the audit committee right now.
Yeah, I was actually kind of starting to wander away, so that's good you brought me
Yeah.
back. So, yeah, so it's, you know, presumably, I could be the chair, Steve could be the outside expert, so we need one more council person. But again, this is gonna be a very low, once we get the mousetrap built, I think this is gonna be a very low stress deal. So maybe that person is Carolyn, or maybe it's Sheridan, or something. We can say to them, hey, listen, we're all gonna pitch in now, we're all gonna have a little more direct responsibility, but you can work with me, we'll work on it together, and I promise you it's not gonna bury you. It's not gonna be a bunch of work. And that's, I can imagine having that conversation with those two, for instance. And then leave the other people that were sort of more comfortable, you know, with their strengths, in terms of finance, to be on the other committees, particularly the budget committee and then you guys. I think, does everybody like you two being on the compensation committee with Chris?
Are we, I don't know that we're creating a compensation
Oh,
committee.
yeah,
Can we just focus on the audit committee today and?
Well, I think you gotta have kind of a game plan for all of it. I mean, that, to me, because what we're learning is that, and this is where when we started, Roger and I talking about, it'd be great to up our game across all of these committees, and try to get us up to the level, frankly, that you described in the charter and the ordinance, which I think is a pretty strong level.
Well, this is about 3 years ago,
Right.
that one.
Well, but she also did one too. So how do you guys feel about that? Where do you see on the budget committee? How would you like that to be? I do think it does need to be
my
more
hope-
formal.
Again, was to work on an audit committee charter, and there's a whole bunch of details in here that I was hoping to get your feedback
Oh.
on. And I think that can then be a template for the other committees, because,
Yeah.
each committee is by nature gonna be a little bit different,
Mhm.
but there's definitely some key issues, this is a draft, and there's, who's on the committee, that's something we're talking about right now, that's definitely something that's in here that I'd like some direction from the budget committee on what the next version of this looks like. Cause you identified the thing about the code that needs to be reflected in this draft before it goes to the council. And just the structure, I mean, it's very important to think about who the membership is. And I had certain reasons for putting certain people in there, but those aren't all of the reasons we need to consider. And you make some excellent points about various people that we need to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, I would just encourage us to think holistically about the overall need. We can't expect Roger to be on every committee.
Nope.
You know what I mean? And we can't expect me to be on every committee, and I don't think Greg wants to be on every committee, so. So I do think it's a balance between those issues, and
Yeah.
I'm happy focusing as a pragmatic next step, like tomorrow, on the audit committee, but I do think we ought to think about how the other pieces are gonna come together, and frankly, I'm thinking that if I do this one, I don't have to be on the other two. But if you want me to be on the budget or the CapEx one, I will, but I'm not gonna lead another committee because I'll lead this audit committee.
I think.
Go ahead.
Let me comment first, if I might, on your general points. I do think that it is a good idea to sort of revisit the committee stuff. And I actually think every committee, including the compensation committee, should have a written charter. It might be only a paragraph or 2 sentences, but committees do get stale. And having a written charter, particularly with a new guy coming into it, it's very useful. And I think if we're going to up our game on the audit side by having an audit committee, I do think we should do that across all our committees. I agree with that 100%. I also think it's a good idea not to have a person in charge of more than one committee, because I just think it's too taxing. So I think that's great stuff. But like Jen, I would like to focus on the audit committee. I think what I'm hearing is, at least you, John, say that you think we should have an audit committee because it is upping our game, and it is certainly best practice. To scope out the issues there, I think the most important thing is having it separated from management so that we have a real whistleblower. So you don't want anybody on management in the team. And I'll come back to the write-up that Jen has with where I see a couple of problems in that regard. The second thing is, I think the scope is quite important. Right now, we do a very narrow financial audit. We don't do what's known as statistical testing. So, Roger, I'll go back to the example that we used on the whistleblower thing. Molly says, "Oh, Roger has got a big contract with his brother-in-law, and we need to investigate that." Well, what most auditors do is they actually check with the firm to see who owns it? Is it as it's purported to be? And did they receive the money that is in the budget? We don't do any of that statistical testing. And so I think that kind of scope stuff is really important that the, you know, that
Well,
either
and
town.
compliance too, right? Wouldn't
What's that?
you add compliance to that list too?
Well,
We get a very tiny little bit of compliance testing, and I think that could be expanded as well.
yeah, and you might even, I wouldn't do this every year. I wouldn't do a compliance audit every year, but I would probably do it in one of the 3 years of the thing. And, you know, you have to also start thinking seriously about cybersecurity risk and things like that. So all of those things fit into the remit of the breadth that you want to do it with. And for example, if you're going to do pen testing under cybersecurity, you probably want a different firm doing it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a kind of, so it's the independence from management, it's the whistleblower administration, and it's basically the breadth, you know, how much stuff do you want to audit? I think those are the important things. I do think for the reasons that John outlined, we should do that. But if there's sort of general agreement, and I like your sunsetting idea. So if we just tried it for the rest of Rogers administration, and then they can figure out if they want to do it after that.
When you think about compliance, you know, one of the things is, you know, Cameron and I talked today, and you know, I then left that call and went and found our own ordinance that requires council approval of committee members. And so, you know, that's a pretty big, like we don't have any of that, right? Like none of our committees have any council approved people on them. And so you wonder from yes, I mean, does that fall within the compliance? I don't know. And also, Craig, you know, I know that you're super into the audit mind, and I'd be happy to just be the other elected official on the deal if you want to lead it, and you and I and Steve could do it, it'd be okay with me.
I want to go into some very subtle issues on the write-up and the management of it. And it's because they're sort of subtle and nuanced. My recommendation was we would decide if we were going to have an audit committee, you know, here today, and then make that recommendation at the December meeting. But the staffing would actually not be done until December. And giving Roger and people time to think about it, because the issue that you raised, so just some very, you know, minor things here, Jim. The first one is you probably want to remove Mayor Harris Sondag at the top and put in Roger's name.
Old letterhead.
I'm just tweaking you, but it should be done. All right.
It's on the charter document.
Yeah. Thanks
So-
for catching that.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the charter document? Would
Yeah,
that be
I'd
what
love
you'd like to do?
feedback from you guys on this. There's a whole bunch of points that I think we wanna talk
Yeah.
about.
Now, let me go into the meatier ones. The meatier ones are, you've got in here the town treasurer. Okay. The town treasurer, let me take a step back. I have said many times, although I was appointed as treasurer, I'm not doing all the functions of a treasurer. And particularly the thing that I don't have is I do not have right level access to the GL. Frankly, I don't even have access to it, even though Jen tried to set it up. I failed twice and then I gave up. And that's a confession from a guy that thinks he's reasonable at IT shit. But the point is, the charter should not have the name town treasurer in it, because by definition, the town treasurer is a member of management, and ergo violates the whole purpose of the separation. All right.
Yeah, I had the same comment. I completely agree with you.
Secondly, I would say making it a non-voting member, that doesn't solve anything. Because if if I were the treasurer and I were committing fraud, I'd hopefully be smart about it and would make it very complicated. And the fact that I heard about it, even though I didn't have a vote, I'd cover my tracks instantly. All right.
Yeah.
So you really have to keep in order to make the whistleblowing and the other stuff, you can't really have people that are in management on it. And I know some other towns have done that. And I go back and go, that's a bit of a finesse. All right. Next, you've got the mayor in it. And I think that's the right practical solution. But I want to go back to my experience. I actually had a CEO that resigned over some of this kind of stuff. And again, he was not guilty at all. It became this huge political brouhaha. But there is a problem in having the mayor on it, but there's a problem in not having the mayor on it. So my practical, in a corporate sense, if you had a separate chairman from a CEO, the chairman would be on it and not the CEO. We don't have that kind of structure. I'm perfectly
We do a little
comfortable.
bit now, though. We do a little bit now, though, with Chris becoming the CEO and Roger
Yeah.
someone
You're right.
becoming the chairman. And so, I think Roger on it is a good thing, whether he wants to chair it or not. But you'd almost be there, right?
Well, the issue though with him being on it is that he is a signatory on our accounts, and I think we're kind of trying to separate
Yeah, that's a good.
that. And I didn't contemplate that.
But is he really part of management?
Well,
I mean, me thinking about who can touch stuff and access stuff, the treasurer has less access to it than the mayor does. So that's why I actually drafted this, to have the treasurer be involved, because he doesn't actually touch anything.
Treasurer signs checks.
Whereas, so in the way we operate in practice, that's kind of part of why I suggested it like this, but it's not necessarily perfect. And I think there's some good reasons to not have.
I'd be more comfortable with the mayor being on it. No reflection on our current treasurer. I just see treasurer as being more involved in the management on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis than the reality of the mayor. I mean, the mayor's not really coming in and looking at the books.
Either one of them has every right to do that.
That's exactly my point. Is I think language absolutely has to change. All right,
Yeah.
you can't have the town treasurer language in here. Now, we can talk about, I think for the reason that you said, on laying out sort of the difficulties, all right, and what are the practical. I agree with you that with the appointment of Chris, that Roger should be acting more like the chairman, and that separation isn't particularly problematic for me, but I'm just saying some people might object to that, or on a theoretical basis, you could. It's the same point with Steve. That's why Jen was saying, whether you consider him a member of management or not, he has a lot of influence, and Steve is pretty smart. So it's a judgment call there about whether you consider him part of management or not. And the same point for me, because I don't have that level of access to the GL.
I think, we're a small town, we need to come up with, I'm not necessarily the path of least resistance, but we definitely don't want to overcomplicate this. And if we could figure out how to get it to the finish line without needing a whole bunch of new faces, I think that would just generally be a plus. I get it, though, that you sort of like to have a two-step process. You sort of want to take this question to the December meeting. Do we want to have an audit committee? I think we can successfully convince the others that it's a good idea.
I think that
If this group is speaking on behalf of it. What was that, Rob?
I think that the general sense here is we should have an audit committee, and
with a charter that expires at the end of the 2 years.
Yep.
And that
And at that time, we reevaluate, decide whether this is the right thing to do or not. Now,
And do we have the right cast of characters?
Yeah.
In place?
yeah, you relook at it. I agree that we have, these functions, budget, capital, compensation, and audit. My concern is, are we overdoing it for our little, less than $3 million a year operation?
Well, I don't think you could combine the audit with the others. It
No.
needs to be separate.
Absolutely.
But I do think, and particularly if you had a robust team on the budget committee, I do think you could put the other two elements, at least you could put the CapEx underneath the
Or part of the
the
budget.
budget committee and just have the same people and it would just be an element of the budget. And maybe you could do that with the compensation. I don't know,
Compensation is very personnel specific, so I'm kind of thinking that that's
should be its
a
own,
standalone,
yeah.
but.
So we have that one and the audit be standalone, but fold it. And that way,
CapEx,
maybe it's the three of you guys, it's
that's
for the budget committee. Are you sanguine with the idea that you should chair the budget committee?
I'm okay with that if you would like to assign me that role. I think it could be, the mayor, the treasurer, or the town clerk.
I think-
Any of those roles, I think, could be the chair of the budget committee. I
Well-
think for practical reasons, because I'm the worker bee, it maybe makes sense because I can steer it without putting too much pressure on anybody else. But
I think
that's
so.
completely up to you. I mean,
Well,
I don't see my involvement in the committee increasing or decreasing either way, whether I'm chairing it, because I feel like on a practical level. I'm gonna
It's
be
the
taking-
logical thing though,
Stuff.
because you're putting it together, you're getting the documents out to all of us, you're preparing the meeting materials.
Record
Now you'll be
keeping.
doing it as the person who's the chair, and I think that makes good sense to me.
you're more in touch with these numbers than any of us. And I mean, I'm impressed that we can take this 15-page spreadsheet and put a finger on a number and you'll explain exactly how you got that.
Most of the time.
That's pretty, that's impressive.
Well, I think it's it's also us recognizing your success in the role by making you the chairperson. So I think that makes sense.
So to the question of, are we gonna have 4 committees? Is it too much? If we're gonna have 4 formal committees, we're gonna have to define their purpose and
Charters.
think
Charters,
about,
yeah.
right, maybe they'll need charters or some other sort of, foundational document or governing document. So there's purpose, there's authority. We got into a little bit of a morass sometime in the last couple of years. Thinking about. What do we vote on at the budget committee and who votes? And if we're gonna have staff and elected officials, administration and legislators serving on a committee, the notion of them voting on something equally, that's crosses wires for me. Kind of just with some fundamental governmental separation of powers
I don't quite-
considerations.
I don't quite get it. Let's say. Let's say I'm on the compensation committee. Now, how are you describing the problem?
Well, our committees have been informal.
Yes.
We've had consensus discussions about the budget.
Mhm.
Capital Projects Committee has been. Like, if you think the Budget Committee was informal, the Capital Projects Committee was like
Way informal.
getting together at Sitzmark. It always happens. But anyways, so if they're gonna be formalized, we're gonna have to answer those questions. And maybe we can just settle on consensus in a charter for those.
Well, remember, they're only making a recommendation to the council. It's not like the decision's actually happening at the budget level, so. you know, the vote or the consensus idea, it's really only agreeing to what's gonna go to the council, and the council's gonna decide.
Yeah.
Still,
Do you have any thoughts on that, Cameron? Like,
No, I mean, I think it's fine to do it that way because it would just be a advisory, right, opinion,
yeah,
recommendation. The problem comes with when you have an appointed committee with 2 or more members, each meeting has to be a public meeting.
Well,
No.
not with two,
not with 2, only with 3.
right?
Is it
Two
more
elected
than 2?
officials.
No,
It's
2
just
elected,
two elected officials.
yeah, 2 elected officials is okay. 3 elected officials is not,
It's public.
because we have 5.
Yeah, well, I mean, 3 council members makes it a quorum, but there is also a section of the Open Meetings Act that talks about committees with appointed members, and so
Formally,
I'd have to look at that, but I think so. So, for example, if you were to form a committee on the water and sewer plan for the town, the meetings of that committee would have to be public. They'd have to be noticed. They'd have to be
if there were
open.
elected officials on the committee.
No,
I think if there's a formal creation, and they were talking about this at a
Yeah.
recent conference, and different municipalities treat it differently, so it comes down a lot to legal counsel and input. But when the mayor and council create a formal committee, it is intended to be an open and public entity. Like that committee should be operating in the public sphere.
Well, our budget committee does that.
Correct.
I mean, that's why we do it, right? And so, I mean, I think we're already doing it.
Here comes the.
It's only the audit committee that we need, not to do publicly.
It's only the what?
The audit committee.
Well, but if we're having 4 committees and they're all public bodies, and they meet quarterly. Or even biannually, I mean, that's 8 public meeting notice and minutes preparation. Hoops to jump through for 16 if they're quarterly, I mean.
Well, I don't know why we would meet quarterly with the audit committee. How could you? It'd be good to know the answer on the rules about the public meeting, because I don't think anybody does the audit committee as a public meeting,
Sure.
Well-
The audit committee doesn't have a.
right? And is that because it falls in a carve out to the act?
I think so.
I think they likely notice the meeting and then they close the meeting because of the topic that they're discussing, right? If the audit committee is discussing some fraud report, they're not going to do that in an open meeting. They're going to close
Right.
but the notice of the actual meeting would take place. But if the audit committee is reviewing, the auditor's recommendations, those are supposed to be open to the public. And so it really depends on the topic, but if it's a publicly formed committee by the municipality, then it has to be noticed and it has to follow the Open Meetings Act laws.
Well, with respect to the budget one, though, we're already doing it.
We're
So I don't see marginal effort there. So really what we're talking about is the audit committee and the compensation committee. Assuming we're gonna put the CapEx somehow are we all on that page? We're gonna put the CapEx.
Today is the first day I've heard of a compensation committee, so
Oh.
I don't know that that's honest. I'm just saying,
Well,
for me, that's the first time, so I think we wanna think about whether that committee is really needed. It may or may not be, but
But how have we done it in the past? Hasn't it really
It's been-
been a committee?
It's been an informal meeting between.
it's supervisors and the mayor and or the town manager.
Right. Meeting with them individually?
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm certainly open to any other solution. I'm not dying to have more committees than we need to, believe me, because I'll end up having to be on 2 of them. I think we should look to Cameron and Polly maybe to come back with some ideas about how we could most efficiently structure those couple of committees. What do you think, Roger?
well, I am sensitive to the idea of loading more stuff on our staff. And if these require not just notice, I think the notice is pretty straightforward, but minutes,
You have to, any committee meeting, even the audit committee would have to have minutes.
oh boy.
That is required. And it doesn't mean that they're comprehensive, but you have to record what happened at the meeting.
Uh-huh.
You have to have documentation of that.
But
Wait,
if you're not gonna have a committee, how are you doing the work?
Well. Yeah, that's a good question.
So generally, it's what happens is it's contained, the work is contained within the executive branch, right? So the executive branch gets a lot of the day-to-day work done, and it doesn't do it in a committee that's appointed by the legislative branch. And so the work gets done by the, one person walking to another person's office, and they have meetings. It's when you bring several branches of the government together, or you make collective decisions that is going to recommend action to the legislative branch, that the Open Meetings Act is designed for the public to understand and be available and involved in that information. And so I think that's probably the distinguishing factor of how it works in practice versus what you're conceptually doing. So I think we can do that. We would have to maybe limit how it's organized, or the way it's organized, or the way it's staffed.
And are there restrictions on who can attend those informal meetings, as long as it's not more than two elected officials? Because like the compensation thing, you can see that being sort of largely Chris's baby, but you're there, you're able to go, you have some informal discussion, and you bring the final number to the budget committee. And we don't go into detail at the budget meeting, we just go into the number.
Cameron, I've got a question for you. Maybe this is just wordplay, but if, would an advisory group fall under that same role?
Yes. I'm looking for it here, but I can't multitask. So if you want to continue discussing, I'll try and find the language.
but let me ask a question, at the risk of being sounding like Jen and focusing only on the audit thing. Are you saying that the audit committee has to have minutes that basically says, oh, there was a whistleblower report, and Molly said that Roger was funneling money to his brother-in-law? I mean, you can't put that stuff in the minutes, and you can't have a public.
Minutes, there's section 5, the rules of order on the 3rd page of the charter. This is directly from the state auditor's website. It says the meeting minutes, the chair shall create meeting minutes, which include the following: agenda, time, date, and location, who was there, any findings requiring further investigation, any votes taken, and then items to report to the council. You could say they investigated a complaint. You don't have to give the details of the complaint in the minutes.
Okay, all right. Because
That's my,
And was there a meeting frequency requirement in there, or just sort of 1, maybe 2?
I think that's kind of what we've all been,
Assuming we don't have any.
as
issues.
needed,
Yeah.
right?
As needed, but not less than 1 per year.
I mean, I think we don't have anything in here that says that currently. We could. But if you look at the tasks of the audit committee, the 2 main things being hiring, I think where we're going with this is hiring and firing the auditor, doing any sort of internal investigation, and the whistleblower. So, I mean, you may not need to actually even meet annually, to be perfectly honest. If you hire an auditor that you have for 3 years, you may.
Well, you're supposed to accept the audit from the auditor,
Right.
right?
So
Doesn't that
there could be
function
a
of it?
pre-meeting, or I don't know that we're giving that task to the audit committee, though. We haven't contemplated that. I think that the town council still does that.
But
Yes.
not if we have an audit committee. If we have an audit committee, the audit committee would receive the audit.
Okay, then we need to write that in here.
And make a recommendation.
Yeah,
I found the definitions. If you're ready for a little bit of the state legislature likes to make you bounce around. So I have a couple of definitions, but a public meeting means the convening of a public body or a specified body with a quorum present, including a workshop or executive session, for the purpose of discussing, receiving comments from the public about, or acting upon a matter over which the public body or specified body has jurisdiction or advisory power. So the other definition is, what is a public body? And so on the next page of the statute, a public body means any administrative, advisory, executive, or legislative body of the state or political subdivisions. And so it really, if you create a committee, that committee is a public body.
But again, we are only required to disclose the short list you just read us.
Yeah,
Yes.
Those are that's what
Time and
should be
place,
recorded in the
attendees.
minutes.
and any actions taken.
Yes, but this is raising a concern just for me of noticing, and then I think if your agenda would have to be such that it would fall into the criteria if you wanted to have a closed door meeting to fall into that. Right, so your meetings would be open unless they were talking about something that applied. Anything that is not closed door worthy would have to be in an open meeting.
Right.
Well, and the only thing that immediately jumps to mind is just the acceptance of the audit each year. Could be in an open meeting, and
Sure.
and the audit, gets published anyway, so it's not really like it's a secret, right? I mean, we put it on the website,
Yeah, I think we want that to be very open. and
so that the
transparent.
fact that that's part of an open meeting, I think, is just par for the course.
Yeah, the only part on the audit committees that I've been on is that often the auditors will do the bulk of the stuff with everybody present, and then they usually have a small session with the non-execs, with the non-management people to report on management. And that's a common thing. That really doesn't have anything to do with the acceptance of the audit, which is all a technical document that is all done publicly anyway. The question is whether you'd want to have that conversation privately with the auditor about whether they had any reservations about the way management was acting.
And
But
so
don't
you,
you think that could fall into the closed meeting?
yeah, so there's a closed meeting allowance for the character, professional competence. I can't remember the full language, but
So
to
you
discuss.
close it for that part. I see. Okay.
Yeah, but there is not a provision to close the meeting to discuss fraud, for example. Like if there was, the banking fraud that we experienced this last year with somebody hacking the accounts and whatnot. We can't close the meeting for that, right? That has to be public.
Yeah. And that makes sense. There's no management conflict there.
Right.
I'm thinking we ought to try to wind this up.
Yeah, me too. I think we're kind of reaching, it was a good discussion though.
Very
Yeah,
good, very,
very
very, very helpful. I think we need another meeting though. I don't think that, outside of saying that we want to pursue, I think there's just a report to the council of that we're continuing to work through the audit committee and the charter. I don't think I have enough
Okay,
I definitely don't think you
detail.
should send this to
No.
the council.
No, this is not ready, and I have a number of edits, but I guess I'm unclear on a few things that I think.
Well, maybe we should
Yeah.
walk before we run and go back to sort of where you started originally, which was to say, do we want to do this? Do we want to, and some of the questions we need to answer, but I would say that it still seems to me highly likely that we want to go ahead with having an audit committee.
I did too.
So why don't we just take that question to the council in December? And if everybody can get their arms around it and we don't have a bunch of dissension, then we can come back through and try to dial in some of this other stuff.
Well,
And you guys can make a recommendation as to what's the most efficient way to do it.
We need more than a name. We need a charter, which is maybe a paragraph.
For the,
Well,
Audit committee, yeah.
I think Jim's got.
If we decide to go ahead with it.
Well, even if we're gonna introduce it to the council.
Oh, you thinking that we could show them
Need
the
some
state,
detail.
you could show them the state charter.
I mean, I think the key places that that we haven't answered on this, from what I'm getting from this group, is who exactly is on the committee.
Mhm.
And then this whole thing of like a little bit more detail on open meetings, but outside of that, I'm not hearing a lot of conflict with what's in.
Okay,
No, I don't
It's
think we
just-
need to answer the question of who's gonna be on the committee before we go to the council and say, who knows, man, maybe somebody will stand up and shock us and say, geez, I really wanna be on this committee.
So I can remove that section that identifies the roles from from the next version. I don't know if I mean, the question is do we even wanna think about it like that? Or like, do we wanna have the external, the council member, do we wanna kind of name roles, or do we wanna just think of individual people that you feel like are good to fit in here?
I think we should ask them the basic question first. I think if you wanted to check with Steve before the meeting
I can
and
do
take
that.
his temperature as to whether he's gonna be a player, because
Yeah,
that's probably the biggest cog that we need to identify is that person, because clearly Roger or me or Craig or Elise would all be capable of doing this.
right, and we didn't talk about other members of the public even too, that was another
So-
option.
I think you need to adjust the minutes or the charters we already talked about, Jen. But I'm a little confused about whether, Roger, you want to go forward and recommend that we have a committee. And
yeah, I wanna.
if you want to
I
wait
recommend-
until January to do that.
Well, I recommend we have a committee. And we need to get the council concurrence on that. The timeliness, as you pointed out, Craig, is either do it now or don't do it. So we gotta do it now, we're gonna do it.
I guess and I've just noticed with this council that the devil is in the details. And it's hard to get, I think you saying I feel like there's already concurrence amongst the council in support of the audit committee.
You think
So
so?
maybe if I thought there was, but maybe that's not.
I didn't detect that, but I
Okay.
didn't detect the contrary either.
Then maybe we just need a very high level slideshow,
Yeah,
try and get that concurrence, and then we hold the charter and the detail for later, but they're not voting on anything.
okay.
It's,
When
is
does
that what
this,
we're kind of
What,
saying?
why is we don't wanna vote on it?
yeah, why not?
What are you gonna vote on? You don't have something to vote on.
Well, we're gonna vote on whether we wanna form an audit committee.
Oh, okay, well, you can do that vote. You just don't have the substance of.
Right, we wouldn't have approved the charter and such
Yeah.
like that, but we could take a vote whether we wanna have a committee.
And Jen, I'm a little confused about,
First step, baby step.
if you take out the specific stuff that I was talking about, referencing the town treasurer,
Yep. I got
I
that.
think the rest of it stands fine.
I need to add in, we need to deal with the, advice and consent of the council. Somehow either needs to be in this or the resolution that adopts this. I think that needs to be established.
Advice and consent with regard to the
The
charter.
creation of the committee itself and just reflecting, acknowledging that, right?
Mhm.
And then I had, let's go.
But that's presumably,
There's authority to sign. And so if this audit committee is made up of, just say it's John Byrne, Elise and Steve Rowley. The charter or the resolution needs to give this committee authority to sign to actually hire the auditor. You don't just automatically get that.
I see.
no, yeah,
I think we want to have that in writing. So that's something else I had on here.
Yeah.
I got it, Jen. But just let me be clear with you, Roger. When I said we need to do this now, I didn't mean we need to do this in December. I meant we need to do this in before the end of Q1. Because as long as we get an auditor hired, the auditor's not going to do any work until, I don't know, next September. But you want to find the right auditor and get them engaged so that they've got time for you. And whether that happens before the end of the year or the end of January or even February, I think we're fine on any of that.
And I'm a little, after looking at Craig and I think we had different reads on looking at the engagement letter and the contract. My look at it makes me think that we maybe have one more year, but I'm trying to find that information out from the.
Well, that'd be good to know.
So, yeah. So anyway, so we're trying to sort through that, I guess, right now.
Yeah.
Sounds,
The paper trail is a little tough to follow.
well, in the first audited year, if we move forward, the first audited year would be the 24 year.
Yeah, it wouldn't be this year, would it? I mean,
Well.
No, I mean, this is the 24 year.
We're in the 24 year now, and so that's where I think Craig and I were just reading it a little bit differently because it's hard to read and it's not easy to follow of like when this auditor is done, so I'll get back to you.
Yeah, right. Although, Jim, the second contract I read, I think was a little clearer, and I'll walk you through that. But you're
Okay.
right, there's ambiguity around these things, and we need to fix.
Yeah.
Well, it was a productive couple of hours.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thumbs up.
Good work. Thanks, Cameron.
Right. John had
Hold on.
on
Sorry.
the desk. The